Hey guys, tonight we sink into the creaking wooden floorboards of a world where insomnia isn't just a modern affliction. It's a state-sanctioned side effect of living under emperors, omens, and a bureaucracy so entrenched it extends into the afterlife. You are in Han Dynasty, China, sometime between 206 BC and 220 CE, lying on a narrow bamboo cot in a single-room house, breathing through the summer night's thick, humid air. Moths batter against your paper windows. Somewhere in the distance, a fox cries like a child. You tell yourself that's all it is. But then the wind presses against your door like fingers. The air shifts and the room goes cold. Your lantern flickers not because it's out of oil, but because something is watching. You reach for your blanket. Not for warmth, but for something vaguely protective. As if cotton could block an incorporeal civil servant from filing a ghostly grievance against you. Because in the Han Dynasty, death didn't solve bureaucracy. It just made it creepier. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already curled up under your sheets, tell me your local time and where you're tuning in from. Ghosts love an audience. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up again. You haven't really slept, have you? No one does, not lately. Not since the neighbor swore he saw his dead uncle polishing his abacus in the moonlight. Not since the magistrate's daughter kept fainting, claiming invisible. Hands brushed her cheek at dusk. You're starting to believe them, not out of gullibility, but out of repetition. See, this isn't an isolated village horror story. It's a nationwide epidemic of specters, and the Han Dynasty is quietly freaking out. Ghost reports flood the local yamen like tax complaints in harvest season. And these aren't your boo kind of ghosts. These are bureaucratic specters. With paperwork, military ghosts who demand back pay, ex-wives who ask why you married again so quickly. Even the living start to whisper. Maybe the dead are just overworked civil servants who didn't clock out. Historians still argue whether these stories were taken literally by the population or used symbolically to critique political failures. But for you, literal or not, the chicken bones say stay inside tonight. The Han people believed in a spiritual bureaucracy that mirrored their own stifling civil structure. Just like every village needed a registrar, every family needed to keep its dead in line or else. The state even issued edicts about funerary rites. Get it wrong, and it's not just bad luck. It's ghost court time. This was a society drowning in red tape, and the tape didn't stop at death. You wonder, is this why your uncle started? Burning ghost paper offerings after Great-Aunt Liu slipped on a millet husk and cracked her skull? It's not grief, it's preemptive appeasement. Because in Han China, the line between respect and fear is paper thin, and it's usually on fire. Your city, perhaps near Chang'an or Luoyang, pulses with trade, gossip, and the occasional exorcism. One moment, you're at market haggling over fermented tofu. The next, someone's screaming about a disembodied head floating by the sesame oil vendor. The city guard shrugs. Another ghost, probably. Nothing to arrest. You return home to your cramped quarters. It's modest but tidy. You've nailed up charms of cinnabar ink on yellow silk above the lintel. Not that you believe in charms, of course, but it's better than nothing. Superstition is the poor man's insurance policy. You hear a whisper in the courtyard. Probably the wind. But what if it's not? The Han Dynasty's obsession with ghosts isn't just about belief. It's about control. The living try to manage the dead the same way they manage crops, taxes, and family honor. Ghosts become metaphors for unresolved guilt, failed obligations, and broken bureaucracy. Your friend says his cousin started talking in riddles after visiting a disused shrine. He now scribbles poems about teeth in the well water. The elders say he's touched by spirits. You say he's touched by trauma, but that doesn't get him. Unhaunted. And maybe they're right. Because last night you drank your father's voice, even though he died 6 years ago. He was asking where his sandals went. You buried him barefoot, didn't you? Because the grave clothes were expensive and the sandals could be reused. Now he's wandering the afterlife with splinters. No wonder he's mad. You start sleeping with a lamp on. It doesn't help. The shadows just move more slowly now. And the dreams, they get louder, sometimes in classical Chinese, sometimes in a dialect you didn't know you knew. The old woman down the street keeps sweeping her doorstep with salt water. She says it keeps them away. You don't ask who they are, you know. They're the people we left behind, the ones whose bones didn't get proper funerals. Because your cousin stole half the coffin money for rice wine. The same cousin who now refuses to go out after dark. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's ghosts. You're not sure there's a difference anymore. Han ghosts aren't vague phantoms, they have motivation, they want things, they protest, they organize. Some reports from the time even speak of ghost uprisings, phantoms seen en masse, drifting like mist toward official buildings, as if forming spectral petitions. One tale tells of a minor clerk who faked reports and embezzled grain. After death, he appeared to his replacement nightly, muttering numbers and bleeding ink from his eyes. Fringe accounts, definitely, but also deeply bureaucratic. Even in the spirit world, someone's auditing your karma. There's a popular poem from the era that ends, "If you wrong the dead, they will file it." You try to laugh, but your window just opened by itself. Funny how wind does that when no one's outside. You mutter a half-remembered prayer. Not because you believe it'll work, but because everyone else swears by it, and honestly, why take chances? Because this isn't just a haunted house. It's a haunted empire. You're walking toward the yamen, the local government office, and there's an odd hush today. No one's laughing at the tea stalls. No kids are chasing ducks. Even the chickens seem confused. That's because 2 nights ago, a clerk died. At his desk quill still in hand, face down in a pile of bamboo slips. And now, according to the terrified janitor, he's still at his desk, writing, every night. Which is deeply alarming, not just because he's dead, but because his reports are somehow turning up stamped and filed by morning. You think he always was a bit of an overachiever, but even that doesn't explain the phantom efficiency. What you're witnessing is a classic Han ghost tale, the bureaucrat who never stopped working. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect spiritual belief or psychological critique, but either way, it speaks volumes that no one questions the ghost's paperwork, just as ours. See, death doesn't dissolve job descriptions. In Han China, it just complicates them. Ancestor worship is serious business, and it's tangled up with this idea that the dead continue their roles in a spiritual parallel administration. They monitor their descendants, report back to higher ghost officials, and occasionally sabotage your harvest if they feel neglected. You can't escape the system. You just die into it. So it's no surprise that when someone drops dead in the yamen, the first concern isn't grief, it's protocol. Do we transfer his duties? Burn an offering? File a posthumous promotion to appease his spirit? Yes, that last one really happened. One court document describes how a respected advisor was granted a promotion after death to reduce his haunting and make sure his soul wouldn't feel professionally slighted. You can't make this up. But the logic is terrifyingly coherent in a society where shame follows you into the underworld and ambition doesn't end with your last breath. You remember what your grandfather said after he retired from minor clerical service. I'm done working. Unless the gods transfer me upstairs. You thought it was a joke. Then you found out your family's ancestral shrine had a mini file cabinet at the shrine. Every plaque bears not just a name but a title. Grandfather. John, Inspector of Granaries Ret. The Ret. Part was added in red ink later after he supposedly appeared in a cousin's dream, demanding people stop calling him Sir since he'd finally clocked out. You wonder if that cousin was just drunk. But then again, the rice wine was clean. And so was the account book, so maybe it was real. You've started to accept that in Han China, ghosts aren't just floating sheets moaning in alleyways. They're complex, relational beings with grievances and goals. Like your boss, but dead. And possibly wearing funeral robes. The reality of it seeps in slowly, like oil in rice. Even household gods get involved. There's a story about a house where every new official who moved in was driven out by ghostly screams until one wise clerk posted a spirit appointment notice on the door, naming the ghost as Night Watchman Emeritus. Peace, apparently, was restored immediately. The ghost, given a title and respect, stopped slamming doors. You wonder if you should do the same for the strange knocking you've been hearing between the second and third rooster crows. Better to offend your neighbors than your ancestors. You pass the temple and notice a crowd gathering. There's a woman there, claiming her husband's spirit has been showing up at his old job, which would be less concerning if he hadn't died 3 years ago, and if his name hadn't suddenly reappeared on rosters. She's demanding a spiritual pension. The local magistrate sighs. Not because he doesn't believe her, he probably does, but because now he has to figure out if ghost labor violates any civil codes. That's the thing. Belief in spirits isn't just tolerated, it's administratively absorbed. There are actual procedures for dealing with hauntings in government buildings, including specific prayers, incense rituals, and yes, burning mock bureaucratic documents to send upstairs. One fringe record from the Wuhan Shu tells of a ghost that began attending policy meetings via a medium who claimed he was channeling a former chancellor. The ghost offered sound fiscal advice, which the court used, until a Taoist exorcist pointed out that the spirit's handwriting was starting to appear in official letters. That, apparently, crossed a line. The chancellor was exorcised, gently, with a retirement ritual. And a thank you note. You pause under a cypress tree, watching. The wind rattle its leaves like a dry applause. You realize now that the ghost stories aren't just fear, they're structure. They reflect a culture trying desperately to maintain order, even in death. When the living are expected to perform flawless rituals and maintain family altars in perfect condition, any slip feels like an invitation for supernatural backlash. And when those expectations collide with bureaucratic obsession, you get the perfect storm. Spirits who file grievances, who clock in and out, who sabotage poorly prepared offerings with accidents. There's even an old folk saying, the ghost who waits is the ghost who worked. It means that the more diligent you were in life, the longer you lingered. Out of duty or resentment. As you near your own home, the air feels heavier. Not just with mist, but with that sense of being watched. You glance up. A crow blinks down at you. Probably just a bird. Probably. But then you remember your neighbor who died of fever last month. The one who never took a day off. The one whose sandals you now wear because his wife sold them cheap. You suddenly feel very, very underdressed in the spirit department. Time to light some incense and maybe offer a symbolic resignation letter, just in case he's still punching the ghost clock. You wake to the sound of a shovel. Not the metallic clink of gardening, but the slow, grainy scrape of earth being moved, one scoop at a time. And it's coming from the cemetery behind the wall. You don't look out. You already know what you'd see. It's not the living doing the digging this time. Or maybe it is, and that's somehow worse. See, grave robbing is rampant in the Han Dynasty, especially during times of famine, war, or political chaos, which is to say, always. You bury a relative with jade ornaments, bronze mirrors, and sometimes even a full chariot, and the moment you turn your back, someone's out there with a donkey cart and zero shame. But when valuables go missing, you don't blame people. Not officially, you blame the ghosts. Because it's less embarrassing to admit the dead are angry than to admit your cousin is a part-time tomb raider. One fringe story from the Guangdong region tells of a rich merchant buried with so much silver that his mausoleum collapsed under the weight. Weeks later, locals reported spectral screams and glowing eyes in the trees. Was it guilt? Was it gas? Historians still argue whether these were supernatural sightings or clever deterrents. Either way, the stories worked. The grave robbers started avoiding that tomb. Sometimes all you need is a few well-timed ghost sightings to protect your inheritance. That's Han Ghost Insurance. You can't afford to bury anyone in peace anymore. Not because you don't love them, but because you can't afford a second theft. So you leave trapped spiritually and otherwise. There's one tomb that included bamboo flutes rigged to whistle when the lid was lifted, terrifying the uninvited. Another had poison needles in the handles. But more often, the real protection came from ghost rumors. You start them yourself, just to be safe. You remember when your uncle died and the family couldn't afford a full ritual. A week later, the storage shed started rattling. They said it was wind. Then your aunt saw him mud on his cheeks, eyes like burned rice. She fainted. After that, every neighbor chipped in for a proper rite. You learned something that night. A ghost doesn't just haunt, it negotiates. It's a form of posthumous labor strike. If you didn't pay your respects in full, they'd start knocking or moving things, or whispering in your dreams about broken tune tiles and missing funeral ducks. The ducks are important. They're part of the offering. Fake ducks, real ducks, wooden ones, you name it. Forget the duck, and you're asking for a poultry-based haunting. One village elder swears he once dreamt of his late mother slapping him with a ghost duck wing for skimping on her afterlife groceries. He woke up covered in feathers, probably pigeons. But the message landed. Offerings got bigger after that. This isn't quaint folklore. This is full-on spiritual economics. You steal from the dead, and they demand reparations, loudly and through deeply inconvenient supernatural theatrics. You try not to think about the time your neighbor's cow went missing, only to be found days later standing inside an empty grave, perfectly calm. No rope, no footprints, just a big dumb cow staring at nothing. You ask the local Taoist. He says it's a warning. Someone disturbed something. Maybe your neighbor, maybe the cow. Either way, you burn extra spirit money that night. You burn enough that the wind shifts and someone's laundry catches a tiny corner of flame. It's fine. They understand. Ghost stuff. Some believe the spirits of those robbed too soon become hungry ghosts, restless, angry, and desperate. The official term is egui, and they're more than just metaphors for starvation or poverty. They're what happens when the social contract breaks, when the line between respect and theft blurs. You pass a wall where someone scribbled a charm in red ink. Do not dig here, the bones are watching. It's half warning, half plea. Because even the most hardened criminals in Han times had a line. And that line was often 6 feet deep. There's also the shame, not just spiritual, but civic. When grave robbing gets out of control, it's not seen as a crime wave, it's seen as a moral failure. A sign that the dynasty itself is out of balance. That ancestors are restless because the living have forgotten their place. You feel the pressure every time you walk past the family altar, every time the incense burns unevenly. A crooked flame can mean anything, a shift in the wind, or a grandmother who wants her earrings back. One particularly disturbing account tells of a man who built his home on old burial land, claimed he didn't believe in ghosts. Then his children began dreaming the same dream. A man without a mouth staring at them, pointing to the floor. They dug, found teeth, moved, started donating to temples monthly. Now do historians think this was mass suggestion? Environmental. Poisoning? Bad well water? Sure, those are on the table. But so is the possibility that when you sleep over bones, you invite company. You don't sleep well anymore. You thought it was the heat or the mosquitoes, but it's something colder. It's the feeling of debts unpaid, not financial, but familial. You never visited your grandfather's tomb last Qingming festival, not out of neglect, just life. But now the dog won't stop barking at the north wall, and your dreams have started to taste like clay dots. So tonight, you do what generations have done. You light the paper lanterns, you burn some spirit coins, you whisper apologies you didn't think you needed to say. Sorry about the sandals, sorry we reused your urn, sorry we couldn't afford a second goose. You hope it's enough, you hope they hear, and if they don't, you hope the ghosts get distracted by someone else's negligence first. You're squatting beside a small fire, holding what looks like Monopoly money soaked in soy sauce. Except it's not a game, and the smell isn't playful, it's ash and fear. This is Joss paper, or spirit money, and in Han China, it's burned. Like an envelope to the afterlife. The flames flicker hungrily, devouring the paper as you whisper names, titles, and the occasional humble bribe. Because this isn't charity, this is tax, ghost tax. Paid to keep the debt off your back and out of your kitchen. It's midnight, and you're sweating, but not from the fire. From the creeping sense that if you miss a name, forget a coin, or misfold a paper offering, you're going to get a very cranky spiritual audit. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, when your soup boils over and no one is near the pot, you'll remember that one uncle whose name you never got quite right, and you'll wonder if he's hungry. Or mad. Burning money for the dead was common in many dynasties, but the Han took it further. This wasn't just a nice gesture, it was a necessity. You couldn't cross into the afterlife broke, any more than you could live in Chang'an without a job. Ghosts needed capital. They needed housing, transport, even servants. So families would spend actual, hard-earned coin printing, elaborate fake currency and material replicas, clothes, houses, horses, bureaucratic seals, all for cremation. You once saw a neighbor burn a life-sized paper ox cart. It collapsed awkwardly, sending up a plume of black smoke and what sounded like laughter on the wind. Could have been kids. Could have been something else. Historians still argue whether this practice was more religious or social, a mix of filial piety, insurance, and guilt. You try not to think about the theory that the afterlife is a sort of bureaucratic continuation, where the dead line up in spirit offices and argue over grain rations. But the stories persist. Dead magistrates asking for clerks, peasant ghosts demanding promotions, widows dreaming of husbands requesting a raise in the underworld. And what do? You burn more paper. There's a merchant down the road who prints spirit money in denominations so absurdly high they'd make an emperor blush. A billion Jew note with gold leaf accents. Ridiculous? Maybe, but when your daughter dreams of her dead grandmother, weeping in rags, you throw economic realism out the window and light that billion. One scholar called it death's inflation. The more you burn, the more ghosts expect. And like any market, demand breeds innovation. Some spirit goods get hilariously specific. Paper massage chairs, spirit condoms, ghost smartphones. The Han didn't have those last ones, of course, but the principle is timeless. You send what the dead might want. And in a society obsessed with status and bureaucracy, what they want is paperwork. Official-looking money. Passports to the next realm. You once heard of a man who had an official-looking bamboo slip forged after death, granting his spirit a title in the Ministry of Agriculture. His family burned it with a full ritual. Whether it worked, who knows? But the haunting stopped. You wonder if this system was less about belief and more about outsourcing grief. A way to turn sorrow into ritual and fear into fuel. Burn enough offerings, and maybe you can control the uncontrollable. Maybe you can put a price on peace. But sometimes you suspect it's the other way around, that the ghosts set the rates. That their silence is conditional, temporary. You're not the only one who thinks this. There's a priest in town who swears he once got a spirit invoice in a dream itemized, complete with red chop stamps. He burned 5 horses and a silk robe the next day. Just in case, the fringe accounts get weirder. One old scroll describes a man who tried to skip the rituals by offering IOUs to the dead. Promissory notes. The haunting started immediately. Crops failed, windows shattered, and his chickens began laying square eggs. He finally caved and held a full spirit banquet. The eggs went back to normal. Coincidence? Or divine collections agency? Historians still argue whether these stories were morality tales or literal events. You just know you're not taking chances. Tonight you fold paper clothes with shaky fingers, trying to remember who wore what in life. Aunt May liked green robes. Your brother hated hats. You write little notes. You apologize for forgetting. The fire pops. A breeze carries the ashes upward. Somewhere behind you, a bell chimes 3 times. No one else is awake. You don't look around. You've learned that's the quickest way to make a ghost more confident acknowledge them. Instead, you pour a bit of rice wine into the ground and whisper, "It's for you. Please accept it." And then you wait. Not for a response, those rarely come, but for the silence. The kind that feels like acceptance, or at least postponement. Because the worst thing isn't a ghost screaming. It's a ghost ignoring you. You've heard the tales. People who tried to skip the rites and ended up living with a permanent presence. Cold rooms. Unexplainable shadows. Babies crying in empty corners. Eventually, they always go back to the fire, to the joss paper, to the ritual. There's a phrase painted on the temple wall. The dead remember what you forget. You don't need a historian to explain that one. You feel it every time you pass the graveyard without bowing. Every time you burn just enough and wonder if it was really enough. And then the wind shifts again. The fire goes out. You stare into the dying embers and hope the silence means they got what they needed. Hope you're not being charged interest. Because you may be done burning paper for the night. But you're not done paying. Not really. Not ever. You're laying out bowls. Not for dinner guests, not for family. These are for the dead and their picky eaters. It's ghost festival season, and if your menu's off by a grain of rice, you might find your well water tasting like ashes, or your dreams crowded with toothless grandfathers muttering about overcooked millet. Han Dynasty ghost banquets are no light-hearted picnic. They're precise, ceremonial performances designed to placate ancestors and wandering spirits alike. You squat down and try to remember. Did Great Uncle Wu hate garlic, or was that the other one with the foot thing? Your cousin says it doesn't matter, but she's the same cousin who offered soybeans to a fire ghost and got a kitchen fire 2 nights later. You're not taking any chances. Food in this world is more than sustenance. It's currency, tribute, communication. And the Han believed ghosts could consume the essence of food, even if the physical meal remained untouched. So when you line up bowls of rice, pork, tofu, fruit, and maybe a few sweets, you're not just being generous. You're negotiating. You're telling the spirits, "I respect you. Please don't haunt me." And the ghosts respond, sometimes in dreams, sometimes through omens, sometimes by doing nothing at all, which is, frankly, the best-case scenario. The Han Empire was structured like a dinner party in hell, hierarchical, anxiety-inducing, and built entirely on face-saving rituals. And these banquets? They're one of the few times the living admit they're still under the dead's watchful gaze. It's not just family ghosts you're feeding, either. There are the orphan spirits. Souls with no descendants, no one to burn offerings, no names carved in shrines. These are the wild cards, hungry, desperate, and dangerously resentful. If you don't leave a little food for them too, they might get jealous, might follow you home. So you do what any rational person would. You make an extra bowl, put it off to the side, whisper, "For those forgotten." It's the spiritual equivalent of feeding the stray dog kind, but also entirely self-serving. Han philosophy might have preached order and hierarchy, but ghost lore reminded everyone that death was the great equalizer, and even the lowliest spirit could knock your life sideways if it felt ignored. You've seen what happens when people get arrogant. There was a merchant last season who mocked the idea of spirit feasts, called it backwards, skipped the rites. Next week, his ox dropped dead for no reason. A week after that, his walls began weeping. Literally moisture trails that looked like calligraphy started forming at night. By the time he held a midnight banquet with apologies and a full roasted duck, his entire house smelled like vinegar. And regret. Historians still argue whether these tales were cautionary myths or community-enforced morality tales. But no one really cares. The point is, you don't skip the duck. Ever. There's something deeply eerie about feeding someone you can't see. You place chopsticks beside each bowl. You pour warm rice wine. You imagine the shapes of the dead settling in around your courtyard. Not all of them are familiar. Some feel older than memory. You nod politely, even though your skin prickles and your shoulders itch like someone's behind you. You don't. Look, you know better now. You've heard about what happens when you disrespect the meal. There's a story about a nobleman who complained about wasting food on ghosts. His wife dreamt of a banquet where every guest had a pig's face. She woke up to find all their livestock had vanished. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one eats pork at their house anymore, just in case. Ghosts, it turns out, have strong opinions. On presentation, you once used mismatched bowls. Nothing major, just some porcelain with bamboo patterns and one with a fish motif. That night, your inkstone cracked down the middle. You switched to matching sets. Life's been quieter since. And don't get started on candles. Red is celebratory. White is mourning. Black is, well, you'd never try black. Not unless you want to see shadows moving inside the flames. A friend of yours did once. She swore she saw her own face reflected. In the candle, but older. Thinner, with eyes that didn't blink. The feast ends not with a toast, but a retreat. You don't clean up right away. That would be rude. You leave the table untouched overnight. Let the ghosts eat. In the morning, you check for signs: tilted bowls, shifted incense, footprints in the ash. Most of the time, there's nothing. But that nothing is comforting. It means they came. It means they left. It means for now, you're safe. You quietly dispose of the food, never eat it yourself. That's a hard rule. One boy did once, on a dare. He bit into a ghost's rice cake and choked on air. Said it felt like hands in his throat. They burned his clothes, his bedding, and his shoes. He sleeps in a temple now. You wipe the sweat from your brow and lean back against the courtyard wall, watching the sky lighten from indigo to a dusty pre-dawn gray. You feel drained, but calmer. Ghost banquets are exhausting, yes, but they're also oddly reassuring. A reminder that your ancestors still count, still matter. And that maybe, just maybe, they're watching out for you too. As long as you keep the rice coming. As long as you remember their names. You close your eyes and let the incense burn low. Tomorrow you'll fold more joss paper. Next week you'll refresh the offerings. But for now, in this quiet moment, between night and morning, you let yourself feel the ancient weight of family and flame, and the faintest flickering sense of peace. You wake up groggy, half choked on incense and regret. The courtyard still smells faintly of last night's offerings, smoke, fermented soy, and the distinct tang of old vinegar. You shuffle toward your family altar and sigh. The rice is dried into crusty pebbles, and one of the tofu cubes is missing. You don't remember taking it. You don't remember anyone else coming by. But there's a faint trail of ash leading away from the table, and you decide not to follow it. Because today's problem isn't food. Today's problem is paperwork. Yes, paperwork. Because someone in your family forgot to burn the right documents, and now you've got a bureaucratic haunting on your hands. Welcome to the Han Dynasty's spiritual HR department, where even ghosts can't escape the tyranny of record keeping. It turns out the dead don't just want snacks and nice robes. They want recognition, appointments, letters of recommendation. Imagine dying and still having to submit forms. In Han cosmology, the afterlife isn't a formless void or a floating paradise. It's a stratified, administratively rigid extension of this world. There are celestial offices, audits of your earthly deeds, and gods who demand receipts. So naturally, people start burning more than just food and money. They start burning fake resumes. Spirit bureaucrats need career continuity. You once saw an old man carefully brush-stroking a bamboo slip with esteemed accountant of river spirits, loyal and diligent. He rolled it in silk and burned it with 3 coins and a roasted quail. His late father was a waterway tax collector. The idea is that if you formally recognize your dead's position, their ghost has stability and, more importantly, a reason not to come mess with your plumbing. Historians still argue whether these rituals reflect actual belief in an afterlife government, or if it was a symbolic extension of Confucian hierarchy. Either way, you know this: ghost management is a full-time job, and when things go wrong, you feel it. Like the young scholar who skipped burning a spirit title for his deceased teacher. 3 days later, his brush hand went numb. Not paralyzed, just unreliable. The ink would smudge. Characters twisted mid-stroke. He held a private ceremony that weekend, complete with scroll burning and apology poems. His writing returned the next day. Coincidence? Neurological issue? Or a ghost with editorial power? You're not asking that. The logic, though warped, is elegant. In life, everyone had a role. In death, those roles persist, especially for those who held power, prestige, or even minor civil status. And if no one affirms those roles posthumously, the ghosts get restless. Think of it as undead job insecurity. You heard about a haunted granary where late-night whispers kept reciting inventory numbers. Turned out the former storekeeper died suddenly without a successor or proper rights. Once the family acknowledged his post and reappointed him through a fire ceremony, the whispers stopped. Rice stock stabilized. Chickens resumed laying. Peace restored by paperwork. And it's not just government ghosts. Even household spirits want formal acknowledgement. Your grandmother used to scold anyone who dared move the kitchen god without a formal notice. He reports to heaven monthly, she'd say, flicking flour at your face. If he's angry, your soup will always burn. You laughed then. You don't laugh now. Not after your last 3 dumplings exploded for no reason. You've since drafted a very polite scroll of gratitude and left it near the stove. The soup's fine now, but bureaucracy doesn't end with just one generation. The longer your family line, the more complicated the ledger becomes. Who needs what? Which aunt was promoted posthumously? Did you remember to renew the ceremonial appointment for your great-uncle, the astrologer? If not, you risk celestial confusion. 2 ghosts showing up for the same job, haunting the same broom closet. That's how you get poltergeist turf wars. You've read about one ancestral shrine that caught fire after 2 feuding ancestors were honored at the same level. Status matters, even when you're transparent and floating. There's also a growing trend of preventative paperwork burning. Future titles for still living relatives. Just in case, they say. Your friend's cousin burned a whole set of merit slips for his grandmother while she was still alive. She's now 98 and claims her dreams are full of banquets and gold robes. Maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's psychic pension planning. Either way, she hasn't been sick in 5 years. You're considering burning one for your dad. Just a small one, nothing flashy. Assistant Undersecretary of Ancestral Affairs. Sounds dignified. Non-haunting. You walk past a small temple that offers spiritual consultation. A Taoist priest sits under a silk canopy, folding spirit promotion slips with fingers stained from cinnabar. He doesn't speak, just motions you over. You show him a dream you scribbled down a cold hallway, tapping feet, a door that never opens. He nods. Someone's waiting, he says, unpromoted. You sigh and drop a few coins into the bowl. He hands you a scroll and a tiny paper official's hat. You take them home, burn them carefully, and sleep a little better that night. You wonder sometimes if the ghosts ever get tired, if they roll their eyes at all the ceremonial fluff. Maybe some do, but others take their celestial roles seriously. There's a ghost story about an imperial censor who kept auditing the dreams of local officials for corruption. If he found a bribe in your subconscious, you'd wake up with nosebleeds and bruises shaped like tally marks. The hauntings only stopped after a public ritual affirmed his title as Heaven's whistleblower. He hasn't been seen since, possibly promoted, possibly overworked. The Han obsession with hierarchy doesn't fade at the grave. It gets amplified. Your place in life was always tethered to a role, a duty, a title. In death, that same structure is applied upward. Ghosts become ancestral administrators. And like any bureaucracy, the machine groans when the files are missing. That's why you sit here now, drafting one more spirit appointment. It's for your cousin's mother-in-law's brother. You didn't know him well, but last night, ink turned to mud and your brush refused to write. That's all the notice you need. You finish the slip, you burn it gently. You wait, and when nothing happens, when the room stays warm and the shadows remain still, you exhale. It worked. For now, until the next ghost files a complaint. You're at the edge of the village, just past the mulberry grove, where the ground stays strangely soft and the trees bend a little too much in the wind. This is where the mediums set up shop. They sit cross-legged on mats, eyes closed, brows furrowed in theatrical strain. Some wear red sashes. Others are covered in bells and chicken feathers. And you're here because something knocked on your window 3 nights in a row, always just after the oil lamp died, and always whispering your old nickname. No one calls you that anymore, except maybe someone who died before you stopped being. 10. So here you are, skeptical and slightly desperate, watching a woman burn dried wormwood and spit chicken blood onto a bronze mirror. Welcome to the Han Dynasty's spiritual side hustle, ghost consultations, medium performances, and the occasional full-blown possession episode that ends in vomiting water and shouting in classical verse. Han China has an entire informal industry dedicated to talking to the dead. Historians still argue whether this system was religiously sanctioned or tolerated out of fear and practicality. You just know that when the dogs start howling at nothing, your neighbors visit the nearest person, who knows how to swing a rooster by its feet. The woman in front of you claims she can bridge the veil. Her voice drops an octave. Her eyes flutter. Then, with alarming clarity, she tells you something only your grandmother used to say when you forgot your chores. You freeze. Maybe she's good at reading people. Maybe she's scamming you. Or maybe she's tuned into something you've been trying not to believe in since the first bowl tipped itself off your shelf last week. Either way, you hand her a copper coin and bow slightly. She tells you to bring a boiled egg, a lock of your hair, and a bundle of rice straw next time. For separation, she says. The spirit's gotten too close. Mediums in the Han Dynasty are a weird mix of folk specialists, religious practitioners, and full-time weirdos. Some are respected, some are feared, all are tolerated. Because when you wake up to the sound of your dead uncle reciting multiplication tables, you'll try anything. The most popular mediums have waiting lists and require offerings just to get on the mat. One famously refused to speak unless the client provided 3 live crickets and a handwritten apology to the dead. It's theater, but it's also therapy. People go not just for hauntings, but for closure, for guilt, for hope. You know one neighbor who went just to ask her mother if she forgave her for marrying outside the village. The answer came back in the form of a falling branch. She took it as a yes, but with ghosts come grifters. Some mediums are frauds, pure and simple. They slip you prepared bamboo slips in the dark, or hide mirrors to reflect flickering images. One guy even trained his pet monkey to throw dirt when cued, which he claimed was the spirit rejecting your offering. Got away with it for 3 years before the monkey bit someone and the ruse fell apart. Still, you kind of admire the hustle. The dead may not always speak, but the living are desperate enough to hear anything that sounds like them. The line between sincere belief and profitable performance is blurry. One well-documented fraud got caught when the ghost he channeled asked for pork. Even though the deceased had been famously vegetarian, the client grew suspicious. But instead of punishing the medium, they simply burned extra paper pork and hoped the spirit wouldn't take it personally. That's the strange part. It's not about evidence. It's about intention. You're not trying to prove the ghost is real. You're trying to not offend it. Just in case, there's also a darker side. Some mediums take possession too far. There's the woman in the mountains who channels her dead husband once a week and won't stop crying until someone slaps her with a fish. Not metaphorically, literally. A fresh fish every time. She says it's the only thing that wakes him up. You saw it once. It was both tragic and very wet. Fringe tailies include mediums who forget their real identities entirely, becoming long-term vessels for ancient generals, jealous concubines, or failed poets who refuse to stop rewriting their last verse. You pass a traveling exorcist with a wooden flute and a pouch of peach pits. He claims he can clear your house in under an hour. No ghosts, guaranteed. Also no refunds. He wears a robe that looks like it used to be part of a curtain and insists on blowing his flute at every doorway, shouting, "Out, out," in the name of the 9 celestial bureaus. It's part performance, part tradition. And honestly, your house does feel lighter afterward. Maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's just the noise scaring off rats. But you sleep better that night. Still, not everyone uses rituals. Some turn to more agricultural methods. You've heard of people planting garlic under floorboards, hanging bundles of mugwort over windows, drawing runes on the bottom of their rice bowls. It's not exactly state-sanctioned, but neither is being haunted. And if a bundle of mint and chicken blood keeps your dreams ghost-free, who's complaining? In the end, mediums are just mirrors. They reflect what people bring to them: fear, hope, guilt, desperation. And sometimes when the night gets too quiet and the wind carries just the wrong scent of ash and jasmine, you think maybe they're right. Maybe some ghosts just want to talk. Maybe some want closure. And maybe, just maybe, some just enjoy the attention. So you prepare the egg. You cut a bit of your hair. You knot the rice straw. You're not sure what the ritual does, but you do it anyway, because at this point, what's one more offering to the dead bureaucracy? At least this one doesn't require a title stamp. You're squinting up at the Imperial Palace, well, the part of it you're allowed to see. High walls, tiled roofs that curve like calligraphy, and guards who'd rather watch paint dry than deal with commoners. Somewhere inside those walls, an emperor is awake, which means 1,000 others can't sleep. You think your ghost problems are bad? Try being the son of heaven with a personal haunting portfolio. Because in the Han Dynasty, the higher your rank, the higher your haunting. Especially if you're wearing the crown. Ghosts, you see, love power, and emperors attract more than just assassins and sycophants. They attract the unquiet dead dot, you know the stories. Emperor Wu of Han, the grand conqueror, the ritual innovator, the man who loved a good necromancer. He didn't just tolerate ghost talk, he funded it. Called in spirit mediums to hold seances. Sent court officials to consult with dead ancestors. Once even tried to channel the spirit of his deceased concubine through an enchanted jade bowl. Spoiler alert, it cracked and no one mentioned her again. Historians still argue whether these rituals were sincere or political theater. But if they were just for show, someone forgot to tell the shadows pacing outside the emperor's sleeping quarters. There's a story that the imperial guards began hearing footsteps at odd hours, light, deliberate, not quite human. They blamed palace staff until they found rice scattered in the hallways every morning, undisturbed except for a single trail of bare footprints. Not large ones, delicate, like a woman's, like a concubine. You wonder if it's the same one from the jade bowl. Emperor Wu eventually built a special ritual chamber away from the main compound, a spiritual quarantine zone, essentially. A place to funnel ghostly traffic. You'd laugh if it weren't so practical. Because here's the thing about the Han court. It's built on control. Political control, ritual control, familial control. But ghosts don't care about court hierarchy. They show up uninvited. They ignore titles, and worst of all, they remember everything. Especially betrayal. Executed officials, restless. Poisoned. Relatives, furious. Abandoned servants, homicidally bitter. The emperor has food tasters for the living. For the dead, just prayers and charm scrolls stuffed under his pillow. One record describes how Emperor An's court was plagued by a series of ghostly visitations so intense that ministers debated whether to increase temple sacrifices or relocate the palace. The problem, as it turned out, stemmed from a forgotten royal aunt who died during a scandal and wasn't given proper rights. Once the emperor issued a public posthumous apology, yes, written in gold ink, and erected a modest shrine, the cold breeze affliction plaguing the inner palace suddenly ceased. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the incense budget tripled that year. You can't help but admire the logistics. Emperors set up ghost management as a state concern. Entire departments of ritualists, diviners, and astrologers worked full-time to appease the unseen. Ghosts weren't nuisances. They were potential court cases, PR disasters, even political. Weapons. You've heard of ministers who accused rivals of stirring up hauntings as sabotage. He planted a talisman in my bedchamber to invite the spirits of the purged. A bold move in a place where the line between superstition and sedition is paper thin. Then there's the emperor's own paranoia. Every dream analyzed. Every odd sound cross-referenced with astrological tables. One emperor reportedly refused to sleep in the same room 2 nights in a row, claiming a shadow had followed him from his bath. And no, not a metaphorical one. An actual, moving silhouette with cold breath and judgmental silence. You once had a dream like that. You hope it stays in the dream. The High Court even employed ghost interpreters, specially trained officials, who claimed they could read the complaints of the dead through incense patterns and ash behavior. Fringe stuff, even for Han standards. But desperate emperors are receptive emperors. There's a scroll detailing a session where 10 censored names appeared in burned paper ash. All matched those executed in the previous year. The emperor had nightmares for a week, ordered everyone to wear white and suspended executions for a month. Then the ash stayed blank. For a while, but the problem is bigger than emperors. Every member of the elite had their own spectral baggage. The higher you rose, the more bodies you stepped over, and the more likely those bodies came back with grievances. You once heard of a minister who lost his voice after promoting a policy that led to a famine. Whispered he'd been tongue-tied by the starving dead. He eventually recovered after sponsoring a mass ritual and donating his estate to the bereaved families. Ghostly accountability, in other words. And sometimes, ghosts weren't seen as threats, but messengers. There's a tale of Emperor Zhuan dreaming of an ancestor who warned him of a corrupt chancellor. He fired the chancellor the next day. Political convenience? Maybe, but you try ignoring advice from a glowing-eyed ancestor floating above your sleeping mat. Even emperors need someone to talk to, preferably someone dead and loyal. Living advisors tend to have ambitions. Ghosts, on the other hand, are already finished with career advancement. At least you hope. You step back from them. Palace wall, shadows stretching long as the sun drops behind the mountains. You imagine the emperor pacing his chambers, incense smoke thick as fog, praying to ancestors he barely knew and ghosts he probably made. You pity him a little, because even at the very top, he's just another person trying to keep the dead. Quiet, you turn homeward, feeling the wind shift. A chill runs down your spine, not because you're scared, but because you finally understand. Ghosts don't haunt power. They are power. Just less patient, and more on fire. You're walking back through the alley behind the apothecary, the one that always smells like mildew and old ginseng, when you hear the sound again. A soft tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on a lacquered table. Only there's no table. Just a pile of broken tiles and one increasingly nervous cat. It stares at something you can't see, then bolts. And that's how you end up hiring a ghost hunter. Because in Han China, sometimes you don't need a priest or a scholar. You need someone with a fan, a mirror, and zero sense of fear. Ghost hunters, the real kind, not the medium performance type, are a breed apart. They're not exactly sanctioned, but they're definitely tolerated. They walk like they own the street, smell like camphor, and carry an arsenal of odd tools. Peach wood swords, ink brushes tipped with fox hair, bags of red beans, bronze mirrors, bells, and of course, the fan. Always the fan. Not for cooling themselves, but for disturbing the air around a spirit's form. Because sometimes, the only way to prove a ghost is near is to watch the air ripple when it shouldn't. You find one near the market. He's sitting under a silk parasol that's missing 3 panels, eating pickled plums and arguing with a rooster. Not a metaphor, an actual rooster in a bamboo cage. He says the bird's a censor, crows if there's a ghost, screams if there's more than one. You hire him on the spot. He spits the plum pit into a nearby jar and smiles like someone who knows he's about to charge you double for incense. His process begins with silence, not chants, not shouting, just listening. You guide him to your house and he walks the perimeter. With his fan half open, his eyes squinting at angles like he's measuring something only he can see. After a full circuit, he stops near the stove. It's not mad, he says, it's bored. Which, in ghost terms, is arguably worse. Ghost boredom is dangerous. A bored spirit has time to rearrange your shoes, tamper with your tea, maybe push the occasional ink jar off the shelf for dramatic effect. This one, he explains, is a shadow lingerer, likely someone who died quietly nearby and just never left. Didn't realize they were dead. Or maybe they did, and simply preferred your feng shui. Either way, it's stuck. So the ghost hunter lays out his tool's mirror facing the door, ink brush on the sill, a line of salt around the bed. Then he lights a thin stick of incense and mutters something to the effect of, "Find your exit, friend. You don't belong here anymore." You watch from a distance, clutching a jar of pickles you don't remember picking up. The air grows thick, then thin. The flame on the incense tilts sharply and holds. Then, slowly, it flickers back to normal. He nods. It's leaving. You ask where to. He shrugs. Not my department. Fair enough. He packs up, pockets the rooster, and leaves you a bill that includes emotional risk tax and spiritual inconvenience surcharge. You pay, not because he fixed the ghost, who knows if it's really gone, but because you slept through the night for the first time in a week. That's worth more than all the jade trinkets you don't believe in, but secretly keep. Under your pillow, there are other stories. One ghost hunter reportedly lured a spirit into a paper effigy, then folded it into a kite and let the wind carry it off. Another used music played at chin under a full moon until the haunting simply stopped. Some take a more aggressive approach, binding rituals with blood ink and chicken feet, locking the spirit in a bowl sealed with wax and buried under a crossroads. Fringe stuff whispered about in markets, but enough people believe it to keep these specialists busy. Historians still argue whether these ghost hunters were proto-psychologists or charismatic frauds. But you've seen the look in their eyes, the kind that says they've stood in a house colder than it should be, heard whispers with no mouths nearby, watched candles die in the shape of a name. They believe. And belief, in this line of work, is more effective than credentials. There's a woman you've heard of, lives 3 towns over. She only accepts cases involving children. Claims she can see the dead only through the fear of the young. She carries a set of dolls, each representing a different kind of spirit. Angry, confused, hungry. She doesn't exercise. She negotiates. Once spent 3 days coaxing the ghost to leave a child alone by giving it homework. Write your regrets, every night. For 7 nights. The child's fever broke. The ghost apparently passed the exam. You think about hiring her next time. But for now, the silence in your house is enough. You sleep with one eye open, just in case. But the nightmares don't return. The cat comes back. The tea tastes normal. And when the wind taps the window, it's just wind. Probably. You start keeping a fan near your door, not for the heat. For tradition. Maybe the ghost left. Maybe it's just sleeping. But you figure it can't hurt to show a little respect to the wind, the silence, the ones who wander without maps. After all, not every ghost screams. Some just wait, quietly, until someone notices the tapping. You're staring up at the stars. Not for romance, not for beauty, but because you're worried one of them is about to kill you. In the Han Dynasty, celestial bodies are not passive twinkles. They're God's emojis, warnings, judgments. Some might say interstellar passive aggressiveness. That comet streaking overhead could be a portent, could be a message from a dead general, could be a reminder that your taxes are overdue and your ancestors are displeased. You squint and wonder, was that star always red? Astrology is a serious business in Han China. Every flicker of light, every faint change in the night sky, is studied by men in long robes who haven't slept in weeks. They chart movements, compare constellations to animal organs, and whisper about death and power. These aren't your gentle horoscope columnists. These are court-level astrophysicists with political consequences. When the stars shift, so do lives. An eclipse could dethrone a prince. A meteor could start a rebellion. And sometimes, just sometimes, a weird constellation is followed by ghost sightings in alarming numbers. Historians still argue whether these correlations are superstition or early forms of mass psychological response. You don't care. You just know that ever since that strange blue star appeared, your neighbor swears his late wife's perfume has been lingering around the rice storage room. And you've started hearing owls at night. Too many owls. In Han cosmology, omens aren't separate. From ghosts, they're intertwined. Ghosts are the messengers. The stars are the megaphones. So if someone spots a corpse in a dream the same night a new star emerges in the west, that's not a coincidence. That's a celestial subpoena. Ghosts don't always speak. Sometimes they shine. And when they do, everyone scrambles to interpret the message. There's a particularly famous tale from the late Western Han of a town that saw a triple eclipse sun, moon, and then a strange blood-red cloud that hovered over the main temple. For 3 days afterward, ghost sightings exploded. People claimed their ancestors appeared not just at night, but during the day, weeping in marketplaces and tapping on well buckets. A medium was consulted. She passed out during the ritual and awoke muttering about blood debts and grain stolen from the grave. It was later revealed that the town's magistrate had secretly diverted funerary offerings to build his new summer home. The haunting stopped after he resigned and made public penance. Oh, and he had to rebuild all the shrines. By hand, you've started watching the sky more often now. Looking for shifts, changes, patterns, not because you trust the stars to protect you, but because you know they might at least warn you. The local astrologer, the one who talks to his goose, has been extra twitchy lately. Keeps saying Venus looks spiteful. You asked what that means. He just muttered something about vengeful concubines and refused to elaborate. And let's not forget the chickens. Because while the stars give you warning, the chickens give you commentary. In Han folk belief, chickens are spiritual barometers. If your rooster crows at midnight, ghost. If your hens cluck at the empty corner of the yard, ghost. If your entire co-op starts flapping and flailing during a cloudless full moon, you might want to pack your spirit money and go visit a temple for the weekend. You heard of one scholar who recorded chicken behavior as part of his divination ritual. Kept careful notes, grows per minute, flaps per anomaly, egg-laying patterns during eclipses. Eventually concluded that a ghost had taken up residence in his library, likely a disgraced historian with editorial grievances. He held a rectification ceremony, publicly acknowledged the ghost's contributions, and started attributing all his more poetic footnotes to Anonymous. The hauntings ceased, but not everyone's so lucky. There's an omen in your own village, a pale green light that floats above the well every year during the harvest moon. Some say it's just gas. Others claim it's the ghost of a drowned girl who was never mourned properly. A fringe theory says she was a spirit bureaucrat who missed her promotion. Whatever the case, people toss in coins and rice cakes now, just in case. You've done it too. Better broke than haunted. The Emperor's court takes omens even more seriously. When a white deer was found near the palace gates, officials debated for weeks whether it was a sign of divine favor or celestial sarcasm. One minister argued it was clearly an incarnation of an angry spirit because deer were sacred, and this one refused to eat. They ended up performing both a blessing and an exorcism. The deer remained unimpressed. It's not just heavenly bodies and animal weirdness either. Earthquakes, droughts, sudden mold growth, these are all seen as part of the same spiritual warning system. The ghosts might not be able to talk, but they can nudge, tweak, tilt the scale. Enough to make a pot boil wrong, a wall crack, a fish swim backwards. And if enough small things go weird at once, people go straight to the temples, or the mediums, or the guy with the rooster and the really judgmental fan. You've even started marking down strange occurrences. Not in a journal, that'd be too obvious. Just little carvings in the edge of your bed frame. 3 lines for the time your ink turned to mud. A circle for the time the incense burned cold. You don't know if it means anything, but it feels like tracking the stars, your own little map of the weird. Maybe, just maybe, one day you'll see a pattern. For now, you sit quietly on the roof, watching the night sky breathe. One star blinks, another flares. You listen for chickens. You feel the air shift. And you whisper, half to yourself, half to the heavens, I'm listening. Because you know something's coming. The question is, will you see it in time? You wake up in a cold sweat, heart hammering like a court drum before a decapitation. It's not a dream you remember, not exactly, but there was perfume, silk brushing your cheek, and laughter that didn't belong to anyone living. You glance toward the door. It's still shut, but the candle's been snuffed out, and your robe's been folded the wrong way. Not how you left it. And you know that scent lotus and red sandalwood. That was her scent, the one you thought you buried, along with her lacquered comb and the scandal that came with it. Ghosts of concubines, you've learned, don't stay buried. Not in Han China, sex, power, and phantom concubines. It's a triangle sharper than a bronze dagger and twice as cursed. In the Han court, concubines weren't just companions, they were pawns in a generational chess match, used for alliances, heirs, influence. But when desire mixes with betrayal, when promises are whispered into silk pillows and then discarded for political necessity, you don't just create heartbreak. You create hauntings. You remember the tale of Lady Yi, a favored concubine of a mid-ranking prince who died suddenly under rumors of poisoning. They say her ghost appeared in the prince's dreams, night after night, lips purple, voice calm, asking, "Who else shared that tea?" Eventually confessed to the emperor that she'd uncovered a plot she wasn't supposed to know. Too late. The haunting didn't stop until her family was compensated, her grave re-blessed, and a minor official exiled. Ghost justice slow, moody, and extremely particular about closure. Historians still argue whether these ghost stories reflect real supernatural beliefs or were political metaphors for feminine power. You think it's both. Because if anyone's got reason to come back, it's the women history tried to footnote. Concubines weren't always mourned like wives, often buried hastily, without full rites, left unnamed in ancestral records. Forgotten, but not gone. They wait, not because they need revenge, but because they want to be seen. You know a merchant who bought an old manor for cheap. Great deal, great view, until his servant started quitting. Said they saw a woman in red watching from the upper balcony at night. Always the same, red robes, elaborate hairpins, no face. Just an oval of darkness where the eyes should be. Eventually, they found her name carved into the base of an old mirror. Cheng. No title, no date. Probably a discarded concubine. He built her a shrine. The hauntings stopped. The mirror cracked on its own. Now he burns incense every week. Calls her Lady Cheng. Says she keeps his wine from spoiling. Might be superstition. Might be fear. Might be a very polite ghost. You check your own mirror. No cracks, no names. Just your own face sleep-deprived and slightly jumpy. You start leaving out small offerings near the bed. Not because you're haunted. Not exactly. But there's been that sense, that shimmer in the corner of your eye. That soft rustle when no wind blows. You remember the court tale about the emperor, who dreamed of a concubine with blue hands. Every time he dismissed her apparition, someone close to him fell ill. Until he held a formal mourning. Posthumous titles were assigned. A day of ritual. She never appeared again. Blue hands. Why is it always the hands? There's another story less documented, more whispered about a scholar who claimed a former lover kept visiting him during full moons. She'd sit at the edge of his bed, comb her hair, and ask him questions about poetry. Deeply specific questions. He wrote an entire treatise called On Lunar Visitations and Erotic Regret. Most of it was burned by censors, but one bamboo slip survived, and it includes the line, "She remembered every line I misquoted, every silence I filled with cowardice." You write that one down. Just in case. Some say ghosts of lovers aren't always malicious. Sometimes they're protective. One servant girl told you she survived a falling beam because she was pulled away by cold arms that smelled like camellia. No one else saw it, but they found petals at the site. Out of season. She burns spirit robes for her guardian ghost every spring. No injuries since, but it's the jealousy hauntings that get the most attention. Like the official whose second wife couldn't sleep without hearing the first wife's breathing behind her. Even after moving again, it wasn't. Until they acknowledged the first wife in the family shrine that peace returned. Turns out being legally replaced doesn't stop emotional residency. Some ghosts file grievances with silk instead of swords. You step outside, into the garden. The moon is high. The shadows are long. And for a moment, you smell that same perfume again. Lotus, faint, not unpleasant, just present. You don't say her name out loud. You don't look directly into the darkness near the bamboo, but you nod. A quiet acknowledgement. She was real. She mattered. And maybe that's all she wanted. You go back inside, lay down and close your eyes. The scent fades. The air warms. Somewhere in the stillness, you think you hear the soft sound of a comb sliding through hair. Then nothing. Then sleep. You're on the outskirts again, where the path crumbles into dirt and the air starts to smell like boiled roots and the long, sour breath of forgotten things. You're not here for a stroll. You're here because someone said the mass graves. We're shifting. Not physically, no one's that unlucky. But spiritually, the wind hums wrong, the crows won't shut up, and the dreams have turned. That's usually when someone sends you to check the old battlefield pits, the famine trenches, the anonymous heaps where names were never carved and rituals never offered. In hand china. Death in numbers wasn't just a tragedy, it was a logistical nightmare for the spiritual world. War, plague, famine each left behind a legacy of ghosts with nowhere to go. These weren't your neat, well-documented ancestral spirits. These were the unfiled, the unprocessed, the wandering masses with no altar, no paper, no burned robe or duck. Mass graves meant mass hauntings, and nobody likes that kind of surprise. Heard stories, everyone has, of fields that whispered at night, of dogs that wouldn't walk certain roads, of water that turned cloudy when passed near certain ditches. Once, you passed a farmer who claimed his plow snapped every time he touched a particular patch of earth. Said he saw children's handprints in the soil. He moved. You would have too. The Han Empire, for all its grandeur, didn't always have time for burial niceties. During the Red Eyebrow Rebellion, thousands died in ambushes, collapses, fires. No records, no rites. The survivors were often too poor, too frightened, or too exhausted to do more than dig shallow holes and throw lime over the bodies. And in times of famine, people barely had enough for the living. The dead got dirt, and that was generous. But ghosts don't care about context. They care about closure. You feel it here, in the stillness. The air is heavy, as if morning itself has taken up residence in the grass. You light incense, even though it's not a festival day. Not because you expect it to fix anything. Just to say, I see you. You've learned that sometimes acknowledgement is all a ghost needs. Still, the unburied dead are unpredictable. There's an old tale of a magistrate who ordered a market built over an ancient grave trench. Profits were good until food began rotting in days, children got sick, and every rooster in town started crowing at midnight. Eventually, they exhumed the site, performed mass rites, and gave the ghosts a shared tombstone. The market flourished again. Historians debate whether it was psychological or microbial. You've smelled ghost rot. You think it's both. There's also a temple near the Yellow River that performs a yearly ceremony just for nameless spirits. No inscriptions, no family names, just incense, paper shoes, and silent prayers. The monks say it's for those who died inconveniently. One monk told you that some nights he hears singing in dialects no one recognizes anymore. He doesn't go looking. He just adds more rice to the offering bowls. You once met a woman who refused to walk past a particular hill after dusk. Said she saw faces in the grass. Everyone laughed until they dug to build a road and uncovered an old battlefield burial. Dozens of skeletons, many of them children, buried hastily with broken tools and a few jade pendants. Probably conscripts. Probably desperate. After a community rite and some apologies carved in stone, the road was rerouted. She walks the long way around to this day. So do you. You pause near a particularly dense thicket. The ground is uneven, mounded like it's still breathing. You whisper, "Peace," not because you believe it will work, but because not saying something feels like an invitation. You think of all the lives stacked underfoot, soldiers, starving, farmers, wrong place, wrong time travelers, people who didn't get goodbyes, who now shuffle unseen, bumping into each other like bureaucrats in a hallway with no exits. The Han weren't heartless. There were attempts, mass mourning days, public offerings, communal shrines. But the scale was always off. The ghosts outnumbered the living. And many of them didn't speak the same language anymore. You wonder what happens to those spirits. Do they clump together in forgotten dialects, lost in translation, even in the afterlife? There's a story about a village that built a pavilion at the edge of a famine pit, not to hide it, but to house it. They call it the Pavilion of Quiet Breath. Every spring, they hang wind chimes and leave bread soaked in wine on the stone steps. No names, just the sound of bells. They say the wind there never howls, it hums, like a lullaby. No hauntings have been reported since. You kneel and place a single rice cake on a flat stone. It's not much, but it's something, for someone, for anyone. You don't need to know their story. You just need them to know they're remembered. And maybe, just maybe, that keeps them from knocking on your window tonight, because in Han China, death wasn't the end. It was just a very long waiting room. And in that room, the forgotten don't wait quietly. You're standing in front of a Taoist altar, trying not to sneeze as coils of incense swirl around your face like suspicious cats. There's a man in a long robe humming in 5 tones, tapping a fish-shaped drum with a stick that's definitely seen better centuries. You've come here not because you're particularly devout, but because something in your house growled last night, and your rice pot shattered itself before breakfast. This is the Tao of ghost management, equal parts cosmic order, bureaucratic finesse, and just enough fanfare to make a demon flinch. In the Han Dynasty, Taoism wasn't just a philosophy, it was a toolkit for ghost control. Forget gentle meditations or yin-yang garden ornaments. Real Han Taoist practice involved rituals so elaborate, they looked like dance-offs between spiritual accountants and paranoid pyromaniacs. Rites were choreographed, talismans hand-painted in ink made from scorched peach sap and cinnabar, and chants timed with celestial patterns. And when you needed results fast, you called in a Taoist ghost negotiator. The priest in front of you isn't just waving a stick around. He's performing a rite known as Jai Jiao, a purification and summoning combo that's been known to make even the crankiest ancestor stop throwing chairs. He steps into a small roped-off square of earth and begins the heaven circuit, a walking meditation that maps the layout of the divine bureaucracy. Each step represents a rank, each turn a report. The gods love paperwork, so do ghosts. Historians still argue whether this ritual evolved from early court protocols, or whether court protocols were copied from the gods. Either way, it's clear. Even in the afterlife, no one gets anything done without proper documentation. You're handed a talisman yellow paper, red ink, some characters, a doodle that looks suspiciously like a rabbit screaming into a whirlwind. The priest tells you to hang it above your door and not to touch it with your left hand, or your right eye. Or before breakfast, you nod. You don't ask questions. Ghost safety comes with odd fine print. This is what sets Taoist ghost rites apart. They don't just push spirits away. They integrate them, respectfully. The belief is that ghosts aren't inherently bad. They're confused, hungry, bureaucratically misplaced. Taoism seeks to guide them back into the cosmic order. Imagine a celestial DMV run by kind but stern librarians. That's the vibe. The priest lights another stick of incense and explains that your haunting might be a spirit with unfinished paperwork, probably someone overlooked in a family rite, possibly a wandering soul attracted to the heat of your stove. Happens all the time, he says. There's even a guidebook from the era, a scroll called the 5 Registers of Peace, which lists over 130 types of ghost behavior and the appropriate Taoist responses. Your case, apparently, falls under intermittent poltergeist with culinary preferences. The cure? Burn 3 offerings of rice wine, bury a clay chicken under the threshold, and recite the cloud-walking song before dusk. You laugh. He doesn't. You buy the clay chicken, You hear a story while you wait about a Taoist master who once calmed a mountain ghost by drawing a door on a rock and inviting the spirit to leave whenever it feels ready. It did. Later, the rock split down the middle. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one builds near it now. It's considered a ghost exit zone. You perform the ritual that evening, just as instructed. Chicken buried, song hummed, talisman posted slightly crooked, because your hands won't stop shaking. You sleep lightly, but you do sleep, and that's the miracle. No tapping, no strange dreams. Just the faint scent of peach and the slight feeling of being watched. Peacefully, that's the beauty of Taoist ghostcraft. It doesn't wage war. On spirits, it gives them direction, a pathway, a structure. And for the Han, obsessed as they were with rank and regulation, that made perfect sense. If someone's haunting your closet, don't scream, don't run. Just offer them a form. A robe, a job description. Congratulations, you're now the spirit of the laundry room. Please only appear on Tuesdays. And sometimes it works. There's even a fringe sect that believes ghosts are failed Taoist initiates. Spirits who missed enlightenment and are now cycling through homes trying to finish their cosmic homework. They teach that every ghost you help pass on adds merit to your own spiritual tally. One woman claims she helped 7 ghosts ascend by hosting nightly storytelling sessions and assigning each spirit a journal prompt. One ghost, she said, just needed to write about his regrets. He stopped flipping her chairs after that. You consider doing the same. You write a small note. Dear Spirit, if you're stuck, I'm sorry. You can use the guest mat. The tea is in the blue jar. You leave it under the talisman. And you sleep. Again. 2 nights in a row now. Maybe you're imagining it. Maybe the clay chicken worked. Maybe the ghost finally filed their report and moved on. Either way, you've developed a new appreciation. A for Taoism. Not just as a philosophy, but as a system of mutual ghost-human relations. You light incense with more confidence now. You hang charms with both hands. And when your friend complains of strange dreams and cold air in the kitchen, you don't mock him. You nod, hand him your priest's name, and whisper, ask for the big talismans, the ones with the howling rabbit. Because ghosts, like people, just want to be recognized. And sometimes, all it takes is a little ritual, a little red ink, and someone who knows how to draw doors where walls used to be. You're seated at a scroll desk, rubbing your eyes as you read yet another quote from the Analects. Respect the spirits, but keep them at a distance. Classic Confucius. Cool, clear, calculated, and slightly unnerving when you've just heard something whisper your name from the rafters. You glance up. Nothing. Just beams and dust. Still, the question remains. If Confucius was so keen on emotional restraint and ritual decorum, how do you square that with the fact that half the village is currently burning spirit chickens and praying to a dead great-aunt who once bit a tax collector? Han China, as it turns out, is a strange place to be haunted by philosophy. Confucianism was the ideological backbone of the dynasty's bureaucracy, a doctrine of ethics, family duty, and social harmony. But when it comes to ghosts, the doctrine suddenly gets shy. Confucius was famously ambivalent about the dead. He advised honoring ancestors through rites, sure, but he avoided speculation about their actual post-mortem activities. If we don't understand life, how can we understand death? He once said. Deep, vague, wildly inconvenient when your aunt is having nightmares about being chased by a floating tax form. You start to see the cracks. On one hand, Confucianism stresses filial piety, respecting and honoring one's ancestors, with rituals, sacrifices, and upright behavior. On the other, it discourages superstition and emotional outbursts. But ghosts, by their very nature, are unruly, emotional, and very into bursting. You think of the local scribe who tried to explain to his father that ghost rituals were unnecessary formalism. The next day, his roof caved in. Some say it was termites. Others say it was his grandmother. Still angry about the funeral tofu, historians still argue whether Confucius meant to suppress ghost belief or simply to regulate it. His followers, especially the later Han Confucians, tried to clean things up, tone down the possession stories, dismiss the weirder dreams, reframe hauntings as moral allegories. Ghosts became metaphors for social imbalance, not actual wailing spirits in the pantry, but the villagers, the merchants, the night guards and rice farmers. They kept believing. Because metaphor doesn't explain why your chopsticks levitated. On King Ming. One scholar, you overheard this at a festival, once tried to Confucianize a haunting. He built an altar, performed rites by the book, and gave a public lecture titled, On Ritual Purity and Psychological Disturbance. That night, he dreamt of his mother pouring soy sauce onto his manuscripts. He woke up to find ink stains shaped like her old hairpin. He now lights incense and bows quietly before every reading. Just in case, he mumbles, rituals are rituals. The truth is, Confucianism created a beautiful system for social ethics. But ghosts don't care about ethics. They care about memory. About acknowledgement. You remember your cousin scoffing at an old grave. What's the point? She's not here. A week later, he caught fire at both ends while cooking dinner. Literal spontaneous combustion? No. Terrible oil accident? Absolutely. Still, no one missed the symbolism. He now tends the family altar with the devotion of a man who's seen the consequences of philosophical minimalism. And even Confucian classics have moments of uneasy ghost acknowledgement. Take the Book of Rites, which outlines mourning periods, ritual clothing, and the importance of grave visits. Why all the protocol if the dead can't notice? You start to wonder if Confucius himself wasn't dodging the ghost question not out of disbelief, but out of profound discomfort. Maybe he did believe, but was too dignified to admit he was scared of cold feet in the dark. You ask the temple scholar for clarity. He gives you a long look, then says, Confucius respected spirits, but he also believed in human responsibility. That helps. Sort of, you take it to mean, do the rituals, be sincere, don't yell when the door creaks. If the ghost shows up, bow politely and offer tea. It's not about belief, it's about behavior. You start applying that logic. You keep your house tidy. You burn paper money quietly. You nod at the altar every morning like it's an old neighbor you're too awkward to make full eye contact with. And guess what? The whispering stops. The air feels calmer. Confucius might not have wanted to talk about ghosts, but his etiquette rules work pretty well when you're trying not to offend a dead aunt who still remembers you broke her jade teacup that you hear about a Confucian academy that had a minor ghost. Problem books vanishing, scrolls rearranging themselves into unflattering poems. Instead of an exorcist, they held a public reading of ancestral eulogies and corrected a few errors in the family genealogies. The hauntings stopped. Not a word of incense, just accurate records. Confucius would have been proud. You begin to think the whole respect them, but keep your distance idea is less about ignoring ghosts and more about boundaries. Healthy, bureaucratic boundaries. Don't obsess. Don't manipulate. Don't forget. Treat the dead with the same order and decorum you expect from the living, even if they float, even if they slam windows. So tonight, as you sit with a cup of tea and a scroll of Analects, you give a little nod to the shrine. I'll file the tribute on time, you whisper. Don't audit me in my dreams. A breeze stirs the paper, just a breeze. You hope. You're flipping through a bundle of bamboo scrolls, old, brittle, bound with faded red twine and covered in characters written in the kind of brushwork that screams ghost problem. These aren't history texts or tax records. These are memoirs, personal, private, and suspiciously posthumous. Welcome to one of the Han Dynasty's strangest habits, writing down what the dead supposedly said after they died. You're holding ghost memoirs, and someone spent a lot of time recording the final, often long-winded opinions of people who couldn't hold their tongue even in death. There's a scroll labeled Asterisk, Voices from the Bamboo Grove. Asterisk, a compilation of dreams and medium visions claiming to quote ghosts directly. One former magistrate moans about how the afterlife paperwork is worse than Earth's. Another complains that no one's updated his title, so he's stuck haunting the provincial archive as an unassigned spirit. One woman allegedly dictated her grievances to a scribe through a trance medium, including how she was buried in a robe she hated and how her third son never visits her grave. That son died mysteriously weeks later. Coincidence? Sure, but you wouldn't wear that robe either. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were actual spirit communications or clever literary devices, a way for the living to voice their guilt, critique the state, or just scare neighbors into better behavior. You sitting here with your tea gone cold and your dog whining at the empty corner of the room are leaning toward probably a little bit of both. Because whether ghosts were talking or people were just pretending they were, the effect was the same. Someone was listening. You flip to another scroll, more formal this time. It's a ghost deposition, taken down by a local official after a family claimed their household was being haunted by the angry spirit of a drowned scholar. The ghost, speaking through a sleepwalking nephew, accuses the village headman of theft, slander, and cutting corners on funeral rites. The official investigates. Turns out, the ghost was right partially. The headman had indeed pocketed money meant for the wake. He's fined. The ghost is appeased with a ceremonial reburial and a new headstone. The scroll ends with a note, no further disturbances reported. You imagine the ghost nodding grimly, arms folded, finally at peace because justice was documented. That's the Han logic. Write it down, and it becomes real. Maybe not physically real, but socially, psychologically, spiritually real. Ghosts don't need you to believe them. They need you to record them. Acknowledgement is its own kind of exorcism. You recall a friend whose grandmother kept a dream journal, not of her dreams, but of her dead husband's. She said he visited her to narrate memories from his youth. She filled 3 scrolls. After she died, her children read them. Found details about a lost family heirloom, a hidden debt, and a forgotten grudge. Everything matched. They built a small shrine and burned the journal with offerings. The next season, their peach trees bore fruit for the first time in 10 years. You wonder, are ghosts just memory with ambition? Leftover identity looking for a narrator? Some scrolls seem to think so. One, titled The Lantern's Testimony, tells of a lamp spirit claiming to house the soul of a concubine who died in fire. The scroll recounts her final thoughts, her regrets, and her wish for her name to be carved into the family shrine. It was. The lamp stopped flickering. Simple. Poetic, a little tragic, but undeniably effective. Some of the weirder scrolls go full narrative mode. Ghosts telling love stories, complaining about their neighbors in the afterlife, or offering unsolicited advice on how to avoid being born as a frog. One recommends never using borrowed pillows. Another insists that eating lotus root in the rain weakens your soul's durability. You write that one down. Just in case, not all scrolls are gentle. Some are accusatory, vicious, even threatening. Ghosts who curse bloodlines. Spirits who name names. There's one infamous record known as the Scroll of Regretful Blame, where a spirit rails against her in-laws, her husband's third concubine, and the entire village for ignoring her funeral. It was found tucked inside a temple wall, presumably sealed there to stop the haunting. You once saw someone burn a copy of it during a wedding. Just preemptively, you start to understand that these ghost writings aren't just spooky stories. They're therapy, they're gossip, they're confessionals etched in bamboo. They're how a society wrapped in formality and duty allowed itself to whisper secrets. If you couldn't criticize a corrupt official while alive, you could do it as a ghost. If you couldn't admit your fears, your guilt, your grief, you could blame the dreams, the scrolls, the ink. The dead speak, and the living sigh with relief.u. Glance at your own desk, now littered with bits of parchment, a brush, and one half-written note. You weren't planning to write tonight. But now you think maybe you should. A short message, nothing fancy. Just in case the dreams return. Just in case someone's still waiting for a word, you dip your brush. You write, asterisk if you are. Still near, I remember. If you are far, I still burn the offerings. If you are angry, tell me why. You don't sign it. You leave it near the incense burner. And you sleep. And in the morning, the note is gone. You're walking through Chang'an, the shining jewel of the Han Dynasty, the capital city that pulses like a giant bureaucratic heart-pumping scrolls instead of blood. The streets are laid out in perfect grid formation, lined with plum trees, and stone lions that have definitely seen some things. From a distance, the city glitters with silk and jade, but up close, it hums with a quieter, colder rhythm. You pass a gate that makes your skin crawl, not because of the guards, because of what you feel as you cross it, like stepping into a space where something old and disappointed has been waiting. Chang'an is definitely cursed. Not officially, of course. No imperial edict says haunted, enter at your own risk, but everyone knows. The whispers start as soon as the sun goes down. People avoid certain alleys, won't walk past that particular stone well, and won't look too long at the imperial tomb mounds just outside the walls. Ghost sightings in Chang'an are practically a tourist attraction. If there were postcards, they'd say, "Wish you were here," and not screaming. The problem isn't just ghosts, it's too many ghosts, layers upon layers. Dynasties rise and fall, but no one really leaves. Buried officials, forgotten concubines, executed revolutionaries, sick children, lonely scholars all crammed into one ancient grid system that never really got spiritually rezoned. It's not a city, it's a spectral sandwich. You visit an old wine shop tucked behind a crumbling Buddhist temple. The owner serves you plum wine and tells you how every full moon, someone hears flute music coming from a sealed warehouse. Used to be a musician's guild, he mutters. They say the last one burned alive during a fire, didn't finish his song. Now he plays the rest once a month. You take a sip of your wine and try not to listen too hard. But you swear you hear something faint, like bamboo reeds. Very far away, there's a district in the east where no one builds past the third floor. They say it's because every time someone tries, the upper rooms go cold. Paint peels, rice sours. One man claimed he saw a woman brushing her hair in his empty study. When he asked what she wanted, she replied, "Less noise." He moved. The building remains empty except for the second floor, which rents cheaply to people who never stay more than a week. Historians still argue whether Chang'an's hauntings are urban legends or collective trauma echoing through architecture. But you can't deny the patterns. The way people change their paths at night, the way dogs pause and growl at blank walls, the way fires sometimes start without reason and always in the same 3 courtyards. You visit the old library district. The scrolls there smell like mold and regret. One archivist tells you he once opened a drawer that screamed. Just once. It never happened again. He switched jobs the next day. His replacement lasted 2 weeks before asking if books are supposed to bleed when it rains. You don't ask follow-up questions. You just make a mental note not to borrow anything bound in red thread. The Imperial Palace, of course, is its own haunted ecosystem. They say the ghosts there are more polite because they're nobility. You don't buy it. Dead or not, rich people still throw tantrums. One guard swears he saw the ghost of an empress drifting through the garden, weeping ink onto her sleeves. She's looking for her poems, he says. They burned them after her fall from favor. She's been editing them ever since. You ask if he's ever seen her face. He goes pale. She doesn't have one. You try to leave the city through the southern gate one evening, only to be stopped by a small procession of monks walking backward, chanting in low, hollow voices. You wait. You ask why. One of them whispers, "We're closing the door." That's all he says. You decide not to press the issue. You walk the long way around. And you don't use that gate again. You stop at a shrine dedicated to the unknown dead. It's always lit, always clean. No one knows who maintains it. Offerings appear daily: fruit, coins, dolls, tiny scrolls with tiny handwriting. No one touches them, not even the street dogs. It's said that if you make an offering here and whisper a name you regret forgetting, the dreams will stop. You try it. You whisper a name. You don't even know if it's real. The wind shifts. You leave an apple. The air feels lighter. Chang'an isn't just cursed. It's overpopulated with the dead, with memory, with the psychic debris of generations trying to live and forget and fail and die in neat rows. And under all the beauty, under all the symmetry and ritual, there's a pulse. A heartbeat made of things unsaid and people unseen. You leave the city gates with your shadow slightly longer than it should be. You don't look back. Not because you're scared, but because you're polite. And in Chang'an, the ghosts deserve that much. You're walking through a field of scorched millet, the stalks brittle underfoot, the sky swollen with a sun that doesn't seem to understand moderation. This is the third bad harvest. The streams are thin. The children are thinner. And you know what's coming before anyone says it. Ghosts. Not the dramatic kind with glowing eyes and tragic flair, but the quiet ones, the ones that look like your father when you dream, or your grandmother when the wind hits the house just right. Because in Han China, when famine hits, the ghosts get personal. The dead don't disappear when food runs out. If anything, they multiply. Or maybe they were always there, just waiting for the silence between bites to get longer. Plague, famine, and civil strife don't just empty homes. They create them for the dead. And when people begin dying without proper rites, the line between ancestor and ghost becomes dangerously thin. The living bury fast, mourn faster, and pray that skipping the incense doesn't invite a cold hand on the shoulder in the middle of the night. You visit a family on the edge of the village. They've lost 2 sons to hunger. The altar is small, the offerings meager. A single yam, a cracked bowl of broth, and a crumpled bit of joss paper with a prayer written so faintly you have to squint. But it's there. Eat this and let us sleep. The mother explains that the spirits of the boys come every night, standing near the cooking fire, silent, eyes like bruised plums. Not scary, just present. And very, very hungry. Historians still argue whether this kind of ghost narrative served as emotional coping or actual supernatural belief. But when the house creaks like a sigh and the dog won't go near the hearth, you start to think the lines don't matter. The dead are always there when the living are desperate. And in Han China, desperation has a face, and it looks like someone you loved asking for one more bowl of rice. That you think about your own family. About the cousin you buried without a nameplate because the wood was too expensive. About the neighbor who left his father's bones in the hills to save time. About the child you saw once in a dream, sitting under your bed with hands in her lap, saying nothing but making your breath taste like clay for 3 days afterward. You never told anyone about that. You didn't have to. Everyone has their version. There's an old saying, asterisk, when the rice runs out, the ghosts sit at the table. It's not metaphorical, it's practical. In lean times, offerings don't stop, they just get smaller. People burn paper in secret, whisper apologies, light incense made from twigs and wishful thinking. And if they can't offer food, they offer stories. They recite the names of the dead aloud, reminding the ghosts, you are remembered. Even if we can't afford the duck, you pass a communal grave near the riverbank. Simple markers. Some names, some not. A priest tends a small altar. He's pouring water into wooden cups and muttering verses. "Drink this," he says. "We haven't forgotten you." You kneel beside him. You don't know who's buried here. Doesn't matter. You pour your own cup. The wind shifts, the silence deepens. Not menacing, just full. There's a fringe tale about a village that survived. A famine by feeding the dead first. They held a ghost banquet every week, pouring out half their meals as offerings, even as they starved. People said they were mad, but the crops grew back stronger. The rains returned. The ghosts, apparently, were appeased. Or maybe it was just luck. But when your life's on the edge, luck and ghosts are equally persuasive. You start carrying rice in your sleeve, just a few grains, for emergency offerings. When a shadow lingers too long, or a voice echoes where it shouldn't, it's not superstition. It's insurance. The kind Confucius would side-eye, but the Taoists would nod at sagely. And your grandmother? She'd call it manners. Famine ghosts are different. They don't rage, they linger. Quietly, they remind you of promises unkept, of rituals skipped, of meals hoarded. They make you question whether forgetting is a luxury only the well-fed can afford. You think about the man who buried his wife and 5 children in a single ditch and still lights incense every year with shaking hands. Not because he expects forgiveness, just because he remembers the sound of them sleeping. You find an old charm. Hanging on a doorframe, a bamboo tag with faded ink that reads, *, we remember. We regret. Simple, effective. Ghosts, it turns out, don't need grandeur, just honesty. The Han believed that even the smallest ritual, done sincerely, could calm a spirit. So you stop on your way home. You draw a name in the dirt. Blow. A kiss to no one, light a twig. Not because you believe in ghosts, but because they believe in you. You're in the county courthouse, or what passes for it in Han China, half office, half temple, and always smelling faintly of mildew, dried fish, and whatever the bailiff had for lunch. The judge is a tired man with a crook hat and an ink brush that's stained from too many bad signatures. You're not here for a land dispute or a livestock theft. You're here because someone's being haunted, and that someone has filed a legal complaint. That's right. In the Han Dynasty, ghosts don't just rattle chains. They rattle case scrolls. The docket today includes a complaint from a merchant whose dreams have been hijacked by the specter of a former business partner. The ghost insists his half of the profits was misreported. Now he appears nightly, dripping ink from his sleeves, pointing at ledgers that catch fire when touched. The judge listens, nods, and orders a ritual inquiry, essentially, a ghost audit. Because when spirits claim injustice, the Han legal system sometimes listens. Historians still argue whether these ghost cases were ever tried with full sincerity or served as symbolic gestures to soothe public fears. But records from the time make it clear. The legal machinery occasionally made room for the dead. There are documents where witnesses swear they saw the deceased in question, testifying via dreams, possession, or uncanny repetition of forgotten details. And while not every magistrate indulged these reports, enough did that the phenomenon had its own legal language. You recall a famous case, a servant girl poisoned by her employer. Her ghost began appearing in the village square at twilight, pointing toward the manor. People ignored it until 3 separate neighbors dreamed the same message. Check the well. They did. Found a piece of her sash. A confession followed. The employer was executed. The ghost? Never seen again. You pass a wall inside the courthouse where strips of red silk are tied in neat rows. Each one represents a resolved ghost case. Some have notes. Jade comb returned. Burial completed. Name cleared. It's like a spiritual court of appeals. And each resolution is a small, bureaucratic act of healing. You realize then, in Han China, even ghosts get their day in court. Especially when they've been wronged. There's another case being reviewed now. A widow claims her husband's ghost keeps upending her cooking pots. The magistrate asks what her last offering was. She replies, half a yam. He scribbles something, consults a Taoist charm expert, and recommends a reoffering full meal, fresh incense, and a public acknowledgement of the husband's role in family affairs. Essentially, a legal apology. She agrees. The case is marked pending spiritual response. The law here is fluid. Official justice and spiritual resolution often overlap. There are even legal precedents where hauntings caused retrials. 1. Judge reportedly reversed a ruling after dreaming of a crying child ghost for 7 nights straight. Turns out the child's testimony had been ignored. The judge reopened the case, issued a pardon, and ordered a shrine built on the child's behalf. The ghost never returned. It's easy to laugh. But when you live in a world where your house might creak with ancestral disappointment, and your dreams might carry legal subpoenas from the dead, you start to take the gray areas seriously. Justice isn't just for the living. It's for memory, for unfinished business, for making sure your rice pot doesn't crack itself out of protest. You ask the bailiff if he's ever seen a ghost testify. He just smirks and says, I've seen juries swayed by less. Then he points to a small incense stand beside the witness box. That's for them, he adds, so they know we're listening. You once read about a farmer who came to court with a clay effigy, claimed it was his brother's ghost, said the effigy gave him instructions. The judge asked why the ghost didn't come in person. The farmer shrugged, said it's more respectful this way. The judge accepted the effigy, heard the case, ruled in favor of the ghost's land dispute, and had the property line corrected. A month later, the ghost appeared to another farmer and said, thank you. That field grew 3 times the usual yield that season. Coincidence or closure? There's also the issue of ghost witnesses' testimonies from mediums, dreams, and transcribes. You're not allowed to base a full judgment solely on spectral input, but you can use it to open a file, to raise questions, to investigate. The law walks a tightrope here. It doesn't affirm ghosts, but it doesn't ignore them either. It treats them like strong rumors, ones too spooky to dismiss entirely. You finish your business and leave the courthouse as the sun begins to dip. Outside, you see a man bowing to a small altar set beside a banyan tree. You ask what he's doing. My sister, he says. She died during childbirth. The midwife was blamed. I'm asking the ancestors if she wants to file a complaint. You nod. That seems normal. Because in this world, silence isn't the end of a story. Sometimes, it's just the pause before someone knocks on the judge's window. From the inside, you're sitting at the edge of your bed, staring at your sandals like they've personally betrayed you. Something strange happened last night. Not dramatic, not a floating lantern or a singing ancestor, but something subtle. You found your laundry folded perfectly, and not by anyone in your household. It's the kind of ghost encounter that makes you question reality more than the jump scares ever could. Welcome to Han Dynasty Gaslighting, Spiritual Edition. The ghosts you've read about, screaming widows, marching generals, vengeful courtesans, are loud. But the ones you're dealing with now? They're passive-aggressive. They rearrange things. They knock politely. They hum your mother's lullaby through your bedroom wall. And slowly, you start to wonder, is something happening, or are you just tired? Did you hear that, or did your brain add it? Han society doesn't help. This is a culture obsessed with omens and order, where a crooked candle can mean cosmic instability, and a sneeze during incense lighting might imply divine irritation. You remember the story of the scholar who dismissed a haunting as psychological residue. His scrolls turned damp overnight, just his, and only the ones he refused to share. He reconsidered. You ask your neighbor if she's ever experienced this kind of low-grade haunting. She nods solemnly. My uncle's ghost used to fix our windows. Every time we insulted him, the shutters jammed. When we apologized, they creaked open again. We just stopped talking about him. The windows work fine now. Historians still argue whether this is supernatural behavior or the projection of collective guilt. But your window has been rattling more than usual lately, and your dreams have taken on a kind of editorial tone, like someone's critiquing your life choices in footnotes. There's a theory, whispered in apothecaries and tea shops, that ghosts of the Han don't want to scare you, they want to correct you. They were teachers, scribes, auditors, grandmothers. The kind of people who, in life, tutted at your posture and reorganized your inkstones. Death didn't dull their instincts. If anything, it gave them unlimited office hours. You once read about a man whose dreams became increasingly specific. At first, it was his grandfather's voice saying vague things like, "You could be better." Then it turned into to-do lists. Sweep the roof. Speak to Aunt May. Burn incense on Tuesday, not Thursday. He ignored it. Then his roof collapsed. A coincidence? Maybe. But he does the Tuesday rites now. Like clockwork. This is the ghost style you've come to fear, most not loud, but insidious. The slow warping of reality until you start doubting. Your own memory. Was that bowl always there? Didn't you hang that charm on the left? Why does your brush move smoother when you recite your grandmother's favorite phrase? The line between belief and paranoia stretches thin. But Han society has already woven belief into the fabric of daily life. So when things feel off, you don't call it madness. You call it imbalance, misalignment, or just someone's displeased. You talk to a Taoist about it, one who specializes in dream interpretation. He nods slowly as you explain the feeling. He doesn't tell you you're wrong. He asks questions. Are the dreams repetitive? Is the air different in certain corners? Have any animals started avoiding your room? You answer yes to all three. He writes you a small prayer and instructs you to burn it on your roof. Not to banish, he says, to acknowledge. If you ignore them, they speak louder. You follow his advice. You write your own small note afterward. Not a prayer, just a letter. I'm listening. I'm trying. I forget things. Please remind me gently. You tuck it under a floor tile. That night, your dreams are quiet. But in the morning, your inkstone has been cleaned. There's a tale about a court official who laughed at the idea of ancestral correction. He called ghostly influence a convenient excuse for human error. Then he began mispronouncing names. Not publicly, only in private, only during shrine offerings. His family noticed. They brought in a medium. The spirit said, he knows the names. He chooses to forget. The official apologized. His tongue stopped betraying him. Linguistic possession? Or a guilty conscience turned theatrical? The line is blurry, but the ink is dry. You realize the Han world isn't full of raging phantoms. It's full of reminders, whispering corrections, quiet hauntings that don't slam doors, they leave them ajar. Enough to make you feel watched. Enough to make you behave better, and maybe that's the point. Maybe these aren't hauntings at all. Maybe they're just continuity. The living and the dead in a perpetual conversation. One side louder than the other, but both still talking. You brew your tea with a little more intention. You dust the altar. You speak a few words aloud to no one in particular. Yes, I know, I'm doing better. The room doesn't answer. But it feels patient, for now. You wake to soft sunlight spilling across the floor, tracing thin gold lines through the dust like some forgotten god finally got back into calligraphy. There's no chill in the air, no whispers from the rafters, no misplaced sandals or clacking bowls, just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't hum with tension. The kind that doesn't make you feel watched. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, your house feels like a house. Not a passage, not a liminal zone. Just home. And that's the thing. After everything, the incense, the dreams, the scrolls full of bamboo gossip, the ghost court hearings, the talisman chicken, and the emperor's paranoid rooftop flute trances, you're not afraid anymore. You're respectful, but you're not afraid. Because here's what the Han Dynasty has taught you. Ghosts are not monsters, they're just people. Bureaucratic, slightly over-involved people with posthumous opinions. But still, you step outside and nod to your neighbor who's sweeping ash from her threshold. She gives you a look that says asterisk. Did yours finally leave? And you give her a look that says asterisk. No, but they're not mad anymore. There's comfort in that. In knowing that haunting isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's attention. Sometimes it's memory refusing to fade. Sometimes it's your grandmother reminding you not to skip breakfast. From beyond the veil. In Han China, ghosts aren't just relics of superstition. They're continuity, they're accountability. They're the moral spreadsheet of a society that believes no story ends cleanly. Every debt is emotional. Every grave is a conversation starter. Every family shrine is a hotline to the ancestors. And yes, sometimes they do call collect. The final fringe tale you read is about a man who wrote letters to his ancestors every day. Not out of fear, not even out of guilt, just out of habit. He thanked them, asked for advice, reported on how the barley crop was doing. One day, he found a letter back. Ink on his pillow, neatly folded. Just one line, asterisk, keep going. We see you, asterisk historians scoff. But you don't, because tonight, when the sun fades and the wind slips through the window just so, you'll light a stick of incense. Just one. Not because anything's wrong, but because someone might still be listening. And maybe that's the lesson. Ghosts aren't here to scare you. They're here to remind you that you're still part of something older, stranger, and deeply, frustratingly human. And now, as we drift to the end of our haunted road through the Han Dynasty, I want you to breathe slowly. Let the weight of all these stories settle into a kind of calm. The tapping on the window, the incense trails, the dreams shaped like regrets. They're distant now, like echoes fading down a corridor that's finally quiet. Your pulse, once curious, once cautious, now finds its rhythm. Think of the scrolls, closed and stacked neatly on their shelf. The ghosts no longer demanding, just present in a soft, background kind of way, like the smell of old paper or the hum of tea cooling beside you. Whatever worries you brought with you into this story, let them wander out with the spirits out across the millet fields, into the mountain wind, through bamboo groves where history sighs but no longer shouts. You've walked through a world where memory never dies, where grief wears robes and rank, and where every forgotten name still wants a whisper. But here, in this last moment, it's okay to let the lights dim. The ghosts are full. The paper has burned. You've said enough. Now close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let the silence embrace you like a heavy blanket. No more rice offerings, no more ledger ghosts. Just rest, deep and still. You've made peace. You've heard the stories. You've survived Han China's haunted halls. And you didn't even have to bribe a celestial accountant. So sleep. Dream gently, and remember, if anything knocks, it's probably just the wind. End of script. Sweet dreams.